It was a rainy Tuesday when I buried my father. The kind of day where the sky feels too heavy, like it's mourning with you. Umbrellas dotted the cemetery like black flowers, and everyone stood in stiff, rehearsed sorrow. But I wasn't crying. Not because I didn't love my father, I did. At least, I thought I did. But something felt off. Like I was standing in a play I hadn't been given the script for. My stepmother, Evelyn, stood at the front, perfectly composed in her designer coat, her black veil slightly tilted. Her hands trembled delicately, just enough to look heartbroken but not enough to smudge her makeup. She'd always been good at that. When the service ended, she gave me a quick nod, like I was a distant cousin, not the daughter of the man being buried. I hadn't lived in the house since college, and Evelyn had always made sure I knew I didn't belong there. My father remarried her after my mother died. I was 13. Evelyn arrived with her cold smiles and perfect posture, and suddenly, my world wasn't mine anymore. Back at the house, the reading of the will took place in the study, my father's sanctuary. The room still smelled like his cologne and pipe smoke, even though he hadn't used either in years. A few family members, mostly Evelyn's side, sat around pretending to grieve. Mr. Gallagher, my father's lawyer, opened the will. I sat up straighter. To my beloved wife Evelyn. She got the house. The cars. The summer cabin. The stocks. My hands gripped the velvet armrest. And then, to my daughter, Emily, I leave my watch. His watch. The one he wore every day. The one he promised I'd get someday. But just that? A watch. People nodded, muttered their condolences. Evelyn smiled, victorious. That night, I couldn't sleep. The storm outside rattled the windows, and grief twisted in my stomach, not just for the loss of my father, but for the feeling that something wasn't right. At 2 a.m., I wandered into the study, the grandfather clock ticking like a heartbeat. I reached for his watch on the mantel, but my hand paused. Behind it, something was taped to the wood. A key. Taped flat with thick black electrical tape. It was old and brass, worn smooth. And beneath the mantel, I noticed it for the first time, a small, locked drawer I'd always thought was decorative. I took a breath, inserted the key, and turned. Inside was a sealed envelope. My name on the front. Emily. With shaking hands, I opened it. If you're reading this, Emily, then the truth can't die with me. I sank into his chair. This wasn't over. This was the beginning. The air smelled of wilted roses and fading incense as the last of the guests trickled out of the chapel. I stood alone by my father's casket, numb and unable to cry. Not because I wasn't heartbroken, I was. But something inside me knew this wasn't the end of my grief. It was the beginning. My name is Emily Hart. I was my father's only daughter, or so I thought. He passed away a week ago, leaving behind a legacy of discipline, power, and mystery. A retired judge, my father commanded every room with silent authority. But in death, he left a silence no verdict could break. After the funeral, my Aunt Margaret handed me a sealed envelope. He said you'd know when to read it, she whispered. I opened it hours later, alone in the study he once forbade me from entering. The letter inside was written in his familiar, precise handwriting. But what it revealed made my stomach twist. Emily, if you're reading this, then the truth has come for us both. Look behind the second drawer in the old oak desk. What you find will change everything you thought you knew about our family. Be brave. Dad. Behind the drawer, I found a false panel. Hidden inside was an aged envelope marked, revised will, confidential. And just like that, my father's final judgment was no longer in the hands of the lawyers. It was in mine. The revised will shook me to my core. My father had left half of his estate, not to me, but to a woman named Evelyn Blackwood, someone I had never heard of. The letter accompanying the will was even more startling. Evelyn was part of my life long before you were born. She was the love I couldn't claim, the truth I couldn't speak. You deserve to know her, Emily. She's family. Family? I sat there stunned, rereading every word. My father had never once mentioned a woman named Evelyn. My mother died when I was 8, and since then, it had always been just the two of us, or so I believed. But as I began to dig deeper, pieces of a hidden life started falling into place. A faded photograph fell from the will, my father, younger, smiling in a way I'd never seen. His arm was wrapped around a dark-haired woman with piercing green eyes. Evelyn. The back read, Vermont, 1985. Always yours, E. That was 10 years before I was born. I pulled out old photo albums, letters, anything that could give me more. And then I found it, tucked in an old law journal, a second picture, this time with a little girl. My age. The resemblance was undeniable. He had another daughter. Had he led a double life? Why did he keep her a secret? And why now, after death, was he revealing it all to me? I hired a private investigator to find Evelyn and her daughter. Within days, he had a lead. They lived less than 60 miles away in a quiet New England town. The daughter's name was Lena Blackwood. Lena. My half-sister. I stared at her photo. Her eyes, our father's eyes, were unmistakable. But her expression was harder. Guarded. What kind of woman had she become? And why had our father trusted me with this secret, instead of his lawyers? I knew one thing, this wasn't just about a hidden will. This was about unraveling the man I thought I knew. And maybe, just maybe, reclaiming the family he never allowed to exist. Next stop, Evelyn Blackwood's doorstep. The next few weeks passed in a fog of unease. By day, I went about life like everything was normal, attending lectures, smiling for photos, sipping lattes with my roommates. But by night, I'd lie in bed, replaying the phone call with my father on a loop. His voice hadn't just been distant. It had been scared. He never sounded scared. I started digging. I returned to the attic. Not for old photos this time, but for answers. Buried behind boxes of my mother's antiques, I found something odd, a locked leather briefcase. It was thick with dust and had initials on the tag, EW. My father's full name. It took me 2 days to find the key. When I finally opened it, my blood turned to ice. Inside were faded documents, court records, medical transcripts, and a birth certificate. Not mine. It belonged to a girl named Evelyn Hart. Born the same year as me. Died the same year my mother said I was born. My hands trembled. I flipped to a hospital report. Evelyn Hart, age 3, went missing during a custody battle between estranged parents. Her mother had severe postpartum psychosis and had been institutionalized. That mother's name? Diana Hart. The name Diana was scribbled over with Elizabeth, my mother's current name. I couldn't breathe. The woman I had called Mom for 20 years wasn't just hiding a dark past, she had stolen me from it. I stumbled down the stairs, briefcase in hand, confronting her while she prepared dinner like everything was normal. "Who is Evelyn Hart?" I asked, barely above a whisper. She froze. Then slowly, methodically, she set the knife down. She turned to me, her eyes blank. "That's not a name we say in this house." Her voice was chilling. Controlled. Practiced. I was shaking now. "What did you do to her? What did you do to me?" She stepped closer. "I gave you a better life. I saved you from a broken home. You should be grateful." Grateful? I ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to get out of that house. Out of her reach. My father tried calling that night. I didn't answer. Because suddenly, I wasn't sure who he really was either. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in a cheap hotel room near downtown with the briefcase beside me and Evelyn Hart's name echoing in my ears. I kept rereading every document, every date, every signature. And slowly, a story unraveled, one I had never chosen to be part of. My mother wasn't my mother. She was a woman who had lost her real child in a bitter custody battle, suffered a psychotic breakdown, and then vanished from official records. Until she reappeared with me. A child no one had been looking for. It all made sense now, the paranoia, the overly strict rules, the obsessive fear of outside influence, the refusal to let me meet extended family, go to sleepovers, or ask questions about the past. She'd built a life on lies. But what about my father? He hadn't stolen me. He wasn't even listed on Evelyn's birth certificate. And yet, he was there in every photo. Every birthday. Every piano recital. I needed answers from him. I drove to his apartment the next morning, my hands trembling on the wheel. He answered the door like he'd been waiting. "I knew this day would come," he said quietly. We sat across from each other in the silence of his living room, the air heavy with decades of secrets. I showed him the briefcase. The documents. The birth certificate. He didn't flinch. "She wasn't always like that," he began. "After she lost Evelyn, your mother, she broke. Completely. When she found you abandoned, half-starved in a women's shelter, I should have called the police. I knew it. But I couldn't bear to put her through another breakdown." My breath caught in my throat. "You mean I'm not Evelyn?" I whispered. "No. You were someone else. Someone no one claimed. We never found out where you came from." I stared at him, stunned. "So, I was nothing? No one?" "No," he said firmly. "You were everything to me. You still are." But the truth had cracked something inside me wide open. I didn't know who I was. Or where I belonged. And the woman who raised me wasn't just broken. She was dangerous. Because if she could rewrite history once, she could do it again. And I couldn't be next. I didn't go home that night, curled up on a couch I barely fit on, staring at the briefcase. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face, no, Diana Hart's face, twisted into that hollow smile. The next morning, I booked a one-way ticket to the town printed on the hospital records, Gravestown, Oregon, a place I'd never heard of, but apparently, the place I was born. Not Boston. Not New Hampshire. Not the version of life I'd been told. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not my roommates. Not my father. Especially not her. The moment I stepped off that Greyhound into Gravestown's fog-soaked air, something in me shifted. The town was quiet, almost untouched. It looked like time had stopped in 1995. Paint peeling from telephone poles. Hand-painted signs. A tiny library that looked more like a chapel. That's where I started. I asked about the Hart family. The librarian froze for a moment, then whispered, "You should speak to Pastor Collins." He knew them. The pastor was in his 80s, skin like paper, but eyes still sharp. When I introduced myself, he blinked slowly. "You look just like her," he murmured. "Your mother. Diana. Before she lost herself." I told him what I knew. Or rather, what I didn't. He sighed and brought out a dusty photo album from a locked drawer. There she was, a younger version of my mother, standing next to a smiling man, holding a little girl. Me. But the man wasn't my father. "That's your real father," he said, pointing. "Elliot Hart. He tried to get custody. But Diana, she ran. Took you and vanished." I felt my entire body go cold. She hadn't adopted me. She hadn't rescued me. She kidnapped me. When I returned home, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was furious. They had stolen a life from me. A name. A family. And then pretended it was love. I confronted my father, or the man I thought was my father, first. Showed him the photos. The documents. Watched his face crumble. "She said your parents abused you," he stammered. "She told me they gave her full custody. And you never checked?" I spat. Never asked for proof? He didn't have an answer. Maybe he was a victim too. Or maybe he just chose ignorance. But my mother, Diana, was different. She didn't flinch when I entered the kitchen again, this time holding up a printed photo of my real parents. "Elliot and Grace Hart," I said. "My real family." She stirred her tea calmly. "They didn't deserve you. You don't get to decide that." She looked up at me then, and for the first time, I saw it. Fear. A flicker in her eyes. "I've already filed a report," I told her. "The Gravestown police are reopening the case. They'll be contacting you." She stood slowly. "You're ruining everything." "No," I said. "You ruined it the day you stole me." She lunged for the briefcase, maybe to destroy it, maybe to silence me, but I was faster. I backed away, phone in hand, recording every word. "You're unstable," I said coldly. "You lost custody. And instead of getting help, you ran. You lied. 50 years. Her mouth twisted, but she didn't deny it. I uploaded the video to a private cloud. Sent copies to the police. Sent one to Pastor Collins. The investigation took weeks, but the evidence was overwhelming. Diana Hart, the woman who raised me, was arrested on charges of parental abduction, identity fraud, and falsifying medical records. My name was changed back legally, Evelyn Grace Hart. I met my father. The real one. He cried when he saw me. We spent hours talking, catching up on years we'd both been robbed of. He never stopped looking for me. I realized then that love isn't about who raises you. It's about who fights for you, even when you're lost. I used to believe I was invisible. Now, I know who I am. Not Audrey Walker. I am Evelyn Hart. Daughter of a man who never gave up. Survivor of a lie that lasted 2 decades. If you're watching this, and you've ever felt like your life was built on someone else's version of truth, dig deeper. Ask questions. Look beneath the surface. Because sometimes, the truth isn't just painful. It's liberating. And no one, not even your so-called mother, can take that away from you.